looking at this.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I want to set the stage by looking at this, piece from 30 to 32,000 years ago in the Chauvet cave paintings in France, and thinking about creativity in the arts. I think maybe sometimes there can be the idea that, the artistic impulse or the creative impulse is maybe it's something you do if you have nothing else to do, or it's only those special people that are artsy, or there's different ways to think about it. But I think I like to consider that creative impulse is something inherent within all of us, even going back as far as this situation, what we're seeing here in the art on cave painting walls. There's something within us that desires that self-expression or that portrayal of our environment and making sense of the world through creativity and expression. So I'm going to pause for 1 minute, and hopefully I'll be able to hear folks, but I want to try and interact just a little bit. I'm curious, thinking about this idea of you don't have to be this famous artist to be creative. I'm curious, where do you all find a sense of creative engagement? It could be in gardening or cooking, for example, but anyone want to share? You can just say it out loud.
Pretty stained glass.
Oh, stained glass. Oh my goodness, I'd love to see that. Anyone else? Where do you find that sense of creative engagement or tapping into creativity?
Nature.
In nature.
Quilting.
Quilting. Beautiful.
Drawing.
In drawing.
Cooking, since I have to do it 3 times a day.
Yeah, may as well make it creative. Anyone else want to share?
Collage.
Collage. Cool. Well, thank you. And I think it can kind of just help us settle into that idea of each and every one of us can be creative in one way or another. It doesn't have to be that fine arts way. It can be simple things, even just doing something slightly differently in our normal life, and finding creativity through that. So I'm going to shift and talk just a little bit about, just as each and every one of us potentially has some way that we can be creatively expressive. There's a lot of inherent creative potential as we grow old. And that second half of life has capacity for ongoing growth and creative expression. And I think one of the examples of this woman on the left here, I don't know if any of us recognize her just by picture. Anyone know who that is?
Grandma Moses.
Grandma Moses, yes. Grandma Moses, who started painting at age 78 and went on to become a very recognized folk art master. I'm going to talk a little bit about the why behind that creative potential aspect as we grow old. So some of it has to do with the actual changes happening within our brains as we grow older, which I think sometimes we can feel hesitant about. Oh no, what happens to our brains as we get older? Is it only bad? But no, in fact, there are things that happen within our brain that can really help unleash that creative impulse within us. And some of the pieces of that are, as you can see here, as we grow older, there are some aspects of our brain where we can have a more widened attention or broadened focus, which can look like potentially, if it's look like being more distractible, quote unquote, but meaning that you can hold disparate pieces of information in your mind at the same time and be going back and forth between pieces of information, and even being able to draw connections between them. Also, different parts of the prefrontal cortex are sometimes becoming thinner in areas which sometimes control things like inhibition and wanting to fit into social norms, as may become less. So as we grow older, we may become a bit more disinhibited and care less about what others think. And those two aspects, that ability to have that broad focus where maybe your mind is going back and forth and considering multiple things at once, rather than that zeroed in focus, and that ability to be less inhibited. Those are actually, if you think about, people like Picasso or whatever, those are actually the hallmarks of creative genius. Being able to make connections between things that at first seem like, what, there's no connection there at all. or being able to just step out and do something in the creative realm, whether or not it's something you've ever done, whether or not it's something that other people will validate, and not being afraid to push back on social norms. So that's one reason for some of that creative potential as we get older. But another piece has to do with that idea of the wisdom that we accumulate throughout our lives and having this storehouse almost of material right for creative expression within us. And that phrase there, crystallized IQ, is talking about, over time, the skills, the knowledge, the experiences, the wisdom that we're building up throughout our life that is intact and building as we grow older. And then we have that to draw upon and work with when we're moving into the creative realm. So we have this creative potential, it's universal, it's there as we grow older. But what about for persons with dementia? Is that still the case? Or does creativity just kind of go by the wayside if you develop dementia? So I want to offer a few quotes from some experts in dementia and also psychology. So that first one, Mary Jane kind of referenced this quote in the beginning, but this is from Dr. Al Power, author and geriatrician. And he says, his definition of dementia is a shift in the way a person experiences the world around her or himself. Dementia is a shift in the way a person experiences the world. And then below that, a quote from, not going to try and pronounce his last name, but this individual, former chair of University of Chicago Department of Psychology. The creative person is one who experiences the world in novel and original ways. I like to pair those two quotes and just think about dementia being this shift in perception and shift in how you experience the world. And then that idea of the creative person, and validating this, the creative person is one who experiences the world in new ways. Thinking about that connection and thinking about the potential, even for someone with dementia, to be in a space where things look different than they did before, where maybe things are being interpreted differently than they had been before, and the potential for creativity within that. That final quote down there is from Dr. Bruce Miller down at the UCSF Memory and Aging Center. And he brings that together to say creativity is an area of strength spared by the disease. And for some persons with dementia, their creative ability is even enhanced. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is too. So I think this is a hopeful message to consider how all of us can have that creative potential. And as we grow older, and even if we develop dementia, that can still be there and can potentially even be enhanced as we see the world in different ways and create new connections. All right, so that was just a little bit about background of creativity and aging and dementia. Now I'm going to go into some of the basics of memory and thinking as we grow older, and some of the terms and concepts related to dementia, just as some foundation. And some of us may already know all this, so anyway, you can take a little break if you already know a lot about the kind of medical aspects of dementia. But so for memory and thinking as we age, some parts of our memory or thinking systems stay the same or improve as we grow older. And that includes that concept I was talking about earlier of crystallized IQ, crystallized intelligence, like our vocabulary, like that typically stays the same or is improving and growing as we grow older, and is intact. Our wisdom is growing throughout time. Our long-term memory often stays very, very intact as we grow older. Some aspects of memory or thinking can decline as we get older. Our short-term memory of remembering, oh my gosh, who was that person? What was that person's name I just met this morning? Where did I put my keys that I just set down? That ability to multitask, or our processing speed, peaks at an annoyingly young age. I've heard different ages, but definitely younger than me. And can take a little bit longer as we grow older to think things through or to process new information. Which I like to think is just because we have so much good information, so much in our brains that we've built up. But so it can be common as we get older you know, a lot of people ask, oh, is it normal if I do this? Is it normal if I do this? Or do I have dementia? But it's quite common or typical to have a harder time remembering, you know, details of certain things that happened, remembering the name of the person you just introduced yourself to at the beginning of this workshop. Remembering, well, you know, why did I come into this room? I came in here for something. I don't remember what I was supposed to be doing here. It's typical and normal. But if a person has more memory or thinking changes than would be expected for their age or their background, there's two different terms that associate with that. One is mild cognitive impairment and one is dementia. And I'm going to talk just a little bit more about those two terms, which are things that people would hear if they go and talk to their doctor and actually get a diagnosis for what's going on. So mild cognitive impairment, it's also known as MCI. So if a person has mild cognitive impairment, that means that they have more changes in their memory or in their thinking skills than would be expected for their age or their background. But the changes don't interfere with their ability to do their day-to-day life. So maybe they're still driving, maybe they're working, maybe they're doing their household chores, planning their life, keeping track of their schedule, paying their bills, all these things. It might just feel like it's a little bit, it takes me a little longer to do those things than it did before, or it's a little bit more complicated. I have to give myself some more time. Maybe I need a bit more, maybe I'm like using a little bit more prompts for myself to remember to do this or that. But basically you're able to get through things and might just say like, oh, I'm sitting down to work on a recipe and I need to give myself a little bit more time because it's a little harder to think through than it was before. And if a person has that diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, it's something typically that doctors will just watch over time. Sometimes, depending on what the underlying cause is, the symptoms could just stay the same forever and ever and ever. Sometimes the symptoms could go away if the mild cognitive impairment was due to something like depression or hormonal imbalance or something like that that's treated, or the symptoms could get worse over time and the person notices, oh, I'm having more challenges with memory, more challenges with thinking things through, and actually it's beginning to affect my ability to do my day-to-day life on my own. So if the symptoms do get worse over time, another term that I'll talk about now, that is called dementia. So that's where a person, again, is having more memory thinking challenges than would be expected for their age or their background. But those challenges are significant enough where the person's day-to-day life is impacted. So it's more challenging to do some of those day-to-day things on your own without support of somebody else. And that can look different. I mean, dementia is a very broad umbrella term. It's not a single disease. It's talking about the symptoms that a person's experiencing. And that can be caused by a variety of different diseases that we'll talk about in a minute. But a person could be experiencing difficulty just with memory of like, oh yeah, forgetting something I just heard, something I just learned, something I just did. It could show up as difficulty with language, difficulty getting your words out, difficulty comprehending written or spoken language. It could show up as having difficulty planning or making a good decision about something, deciding about, somebody just called me and said that they want me to give them $5 million. Should I do this or not? Making those decisions can be hard. It could show up as a person feeling confused about, it's dark outside. Is it 5 a.m. or is it 9 p.m.? I don't know if it's morning or evening, or I'm in an unfamiliar room. I'm not sure, where am I? Am I at my workplace? Am I at home? It can show up also as difficulty taking in new information and processing and making sense of it. Or even for some people, dementia can show up within that visual spatial area where it's hard to look at something and know what it is, or it might be hard to reach out and pick up or like grab a doorknob. Just making sense of the world spatially can be challenging. So I think mainly just noting that because our brains are responsible for so much, when our brains are impacted by dementia, it can show up in a lot of different ways. And those symptoms typically are progressive, meaning that over time, people have more and more significant symptoms. So mild cognitive impairment and dementia, these are broad terms. They're talking about the experience that a person is having with memory or thinking. It doesn't tell you why is that happening to the person. So there are a lot of different things that can cause changes in memory and in thinking. For example, I'm noticing, the last several nights I haven't slept super well. And I can notice this morning, like, oh, I feel like I need another cup of coffee to be able to go through this presentation. I'm sure that all of us have experienced throughout our lives different things that we notice can impact our memory or thinking. Alcohol can affect it. Depression, anxiety, big ones, can affect our ability to think clearly. Our diet, our nutrition can impact our memory and our thinking. And plenty of other things that have that impact. And probably, again, if I gave you a minute, you could probably say for yourself, what kind of things help you think more clearly, what kind of thing, pulling an all-nighter in college, all of that, we notice the impact. So if a person goes into their doctor and says, I'm having some difficulty with memory or thinking, oftentimes the provider will be taking a look at all these different types of things that can cause changes with memory or thinking. And if there are some things that can be treated, like they find, oh, you're actually highly anxious, let's work on that and see how that works. If those potential treatable causes are addressed and kind of ruled out, and the person is still experiencing those symptoms, and maybe even the symptoms are getting worse, it may be that underlying cause is what's called a neurodegenerative disease. So a disease that's damaging the brain cells over time. And it can be a process to discern that and to figure out what really is going on. But getting that diagnosis can include things like just having an interview around what the person is experiencing, talking to other family members. It can include taking pictures of the brain through brain scans. It can include doing they call them, paper and pencil testing, where you're counting backward from 100 by 7, or you're putting your hand into a bag and feeling shapes and identifying what are the shapes, or a lot of different other kinds of tests that help figure out how are different parts of the brain working or not working, and what that might mean about the underlying cause. So in terms of those neurodegenerative diseases, so diseases that are actually causing damage to the brain cells over time, these are the most common ones here on the screen, and by far the most common of all of them is one that all of us have heard of, Alzheimer's disease. Perhaps 60 to 80% of dementias are caused by Alzheimer's disease. But there's other types of diseases that also can cause the same or similar symptoms or similar changes. So vascular dementia is another one that's fairly common, and those can sometimes go together. But that's damage in the brain that's caused by the vascular system. So things related to how the blood is moving in the brain. It could be things like little mini strokes that are affecting the blood flow to the brain, or other things. And then those other couple ones, dementia with Lewy bodies, slightly less common, but that one has a certain protein in the brain that causes symptoms similar to Alzheimer's, but in this case, there are other things that can go with it as well. And then frontotemporal dementia, another type where there can be some symptoms, sometimes not even necessarily related to memory, but potentially more changes with personality or behavior, or social inhibitions and things. So you can say more about those if you want later, but just to note, there are different types of these neurodegenerative diseases that impact the brain and that can cause those symptoms of mild cognitive impairment or dementia. All right, and then as I mentioned, dementia typically is something that's slowly progressive over time. A person can live with, for example, Alzheimer's disease a person can live anywhere from 2 to 20 years after diagnosis. So it's not like, oh, you're diagnosed and that's it. It can be a very long, slow process over time. And people go through different stages as they move forward. They can stay in any one stage for quite a long time, especially depending on some of those lifestyle interventions people are doing to stay healthy. And people may not go through all the stages, but in the early stage of dementia, that's where a person may need some additional support from a friend or a partner, maybe some reminding about this or that, maybe some prompting, maybe some, calling, or like, hey, did you do this thing? Or those supports, but a person is able to handle their personal self-care on their own. So they're able to do things like, eat, bathe, clothe themselves, and that type of thing on their own. And then a person is considered in mid stage of dementia when they do need some more support with those personal self-care aspects. So maybe support with getting dressed, bathing, going to the bathroom, eating. And then in the late stage, a person is usually relying on others for all of their day-to-day needs. And again, each of these stages can be many, many years. And somebody doesn't necessarily go through all the stages. And it's not necessarily super cut and dried. I think science likes to make things seem very, very distinct and separate, 7 stages of whatever. But these are more broad ways of talking about stages of dementia to help a person have a sense of kind of where am I at. Okay, so that was a little bit about some of the basics of the brain changes. And then I want to think together about treatments, or how we're approaching treatment, both in a medical realm, but also as Mary Jane would say, thinking about treatment as engagement as treatment. So still to date, there aren't any quote unquote cures for any of these neurodegenerative conditions. We don't have that magic bullet. We don't have some pill somebody can take where suddenly the disease itself, the underlying disease, goes away. Over the last couple of decades, we've really been focusing on ways to address the symptoms that people experience and to improve their quality of life. So there are a few medications that have been approved for a while now to treat some of those memory and thinking symptoms, to help people process information a little bit easier. But those haven't been geared toward fixing the underlying brain changes, if that makes sense. It kind of helps speed along processing and deal with some of the symptoms. And then recently, probably you've seen in the news in the last year and a half or so, we've seen some new medications coming out in the market, and sometimes controversial. But the thing about those class of medications that they may affect that underlying disease process. In the target treatment there is trying to remove one of the plaques associated with Alzheimer's, which is called amyloid. So we're in a space right now where we're starting to see some new, again, not a magic bullet type of thing and not a cure, but exploration of possible treatments that can affect that disease process a bit. And then along with some of those pharmaceutical interventions within the medical treatment setting, rehab specialists also play a really important role in treatment. And so those are people like speech and language pathologists, PTs, OTs, rec therapists, neuropsychologists that have a rehab orientation. So all of those sorts of rehab specialists can work closely with persons with memory loss to help them create extra scaffolding in their daily life to help them stay independent and overcome some of the challenges they might experience. So for example, a speech and language therapist might work with somebody to consider new like special communication tools they can be using if they're having difficulty with verbal processing. Neuropsychologists can work with people on things like creating systems for managing their medication so they can do it independently, or creating new calendaring systems where they can keep track of their appointments in a way that they can remember in kind of a habit-centered way. So ways to support people's daily life and quality of life. Then in the realm of treatment, there's also a lot of work being done to consider what types of lifestyle changes or lifestyle interventions can support quality of life and promote brain health. And these are just 5 of the common types of lifestyle interventions that are recommended for brain health. Or the first and foremost one being regular exercise, aerobic exercise, getting that blood flow to the brain, paying attention to your healthy diet. That Mediterranean diet is the most studied diet for brain health, but really trying to remove processed foods, eating lots of healthy vegetables, leafy greens, and less sugar. Anyway, you can read more about it if you like. Reducing your stress is a big one. I think even, for any of us with or without dementia, that added stress or chronic stress can really make it harder to think properly. Getting good sleep and social connection even is a big one that we sometimes don't think about in terms of brain health, but there's been a lot of research into ways that social connection versus social isolation and loneliness actually does have a big impact on how our brain works. All right, so just to think about the context of how many people actually have dementia and how many people in the Metro Valley may have dementia around the world, and we're talking about maybe 50 million people living with dementia. Here in the US, it's around almost 6 million people, and that's growing. The prevalence of dementia grows as we age. It's certainly not something that happens, for sure as you get older, but something, as you can see there, maybe 3% of people from age 65 to 74 have dementia, but around 1/3 of people aged 85 and older have dementia. So again, prevalence increases as we grow older, and the prevalence is different within different populations. Here in our state, roughly 120,000 people live with dementia, and over 310,000 people care for someone with dementia. And it's the 3rd leading cause of death. I don't know the specific stats in the Metro Valley, but we can feel pretty confident that, wherever we live, there are a number of people with dementia within our communities. And with that, many family caregivers as well. So those numbers sometimes can sound pretty scary when we think about like, wow, there's so many of us living with dementia. I think for a long time, we've had more of a negative framing of dementia and a negative narrative. More of a fear-based narrative around dementia. This book on the left just is an example of that. It's called As Mom Fades Away. There's been more of that idea of once you have dementia, you're gone. We've heard language like you're an empty shell of who you used to be. There's no one there anymore. And with that mentality, the idea of starting a creative arts program for people with dementia, it doesn't even make sense. Why would you do that? The person's gone. The person's an empty shell. Why would you try and do art with them? And I think that narrative really harmed our society and certainly people with dementia. And I'm really glad that in the last 12 years or so, we've been seeing a shift just culturally toward recognizing, no, people with dementia are not just an empty shell. There's a person there. And the picture on the right here, I think emphasizes that. This is a man named Neil who goes to a memory loss program at a senior center here in Seattle, but he was in a program where they did an art project about what they wanted the world to know about living with dementia. And his statement here is, I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm not an empty shell. I'm still here. I'm me, whoever that me is. I am me. And I still want to engage. I'm still a part of the community. I still deserve opportunities to connect with others. I'm here. And I think that's a beautiful foundation for considering as a community how we can be inclusive and engaging of persons with dementia rather than writing them off as, they're gone. A little bit more on that kind of reframing or new narrative that's been emerging in the last decade or so. This is a woman named Miriam Marquez. She's been a long-term advocate living with Alzheimer's, one of the first, like Don Reddington, one of the forerunners, I feel like, in our state in speaking up about their diagnosis. And this is a quote from her: "When I was diagnosed, I made some choices about how I was going to live my life because I didn't know, and none of us know how many good years we have left. So I just started to do the things that I love to do. I went to lots of places, I met wonderful friends. There is life after diagnosis, and it can be really wonderful." And I think what I emphasize from this is just her statement: there is life after diagnosis. There's challenge. There can be, pain, grief, loss, all of those things, and also life. Life continues on, potentially in new shapes and forms, but we can support that process for people and continuing to pursue quality of life, whatever that looks like for the person as they live with dementia. We've also seen a lot within this narrative, shifting in narrative around dementia. We've seen a lot of this idea of living well with dementia. Maybe we used to talk about, well, suffering with dementia, you're dying with dementia, but instead this idea of like, well, what does it look like if there is life after diagnosis? What does it look like to even consider living well with dementia? And this image is from the Alzheimer's Association. They were looking into what are those aspects of life that can promote how can you promote quality of life? What does quality of life look like? And thinking about ways to continue challenging yourself, even with dementia, continuing to find a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, finding ways to express yourself, including the creative arts, staying connected to others. And other, this is personalized to each individual, what living well looks like. But I think even that idea of living well with dementia is new in the last 10, 15 years or so. All right, I want to talk just a little bit about strengths that are maintained in the midst of dementia, which goes with this idea of living well. So dementia, there's damage happening in the brain. In some part of the brain. However, our wild and marvelous brains are very large. There's lots of parts of them. And depending on what that underlying disease is, there's many parts of the brain that are still functioning very well. And I think many times the person with dementia or the doctor, the doctor sees what's going wrong and comments on that. But there's a lot that's going right within the brains of someone with dementia. And so I want to talk about just some of those and then make the connection between how those strengths also translate into that ability within the creative arts. So some of those well-maintained strengths in persons with dementia, and again, this can vary, this is very general. It can vary from person to person, just like the symptoms of dementia can vary from person to person. But many times that what's called procedural memory, or our memory of how to do something, it's also called habit memory, can be very well maintained in someone with dementia for a very long time throughout the course of their disease. So that's the memory of, like this one, Miriam, again, this is Miriam, what to do when I have a paintbrush in my hand. If I've done any painting throughout my life, being able to hold that paintbrush and knowing, oh, this isn't something that I put in my ear. This is something I move my hand with. It's a habit memory. Or, I've definitely known so many people that played musical instruments throughout their life. Maybe I'm saying hello to them. They may not remember my name or their name, but you give them their ukulele or whatever, and suddenly they're playing away. That's habit memory. That's amazing. That's something that's like really well maintained in people. And it's something that habit memory skill is something that we're now understanding as like rehab oriented specialists, that you can use habit memory to help people with dementia learn new things rather than thinking, oh, you can't learn because you can't remember. Well, maybe you can't remember facts that you just heard, but your body can remember things if you do something over and over and over again. So that's, anyway, I could go on about this, but it's cool just to think about even being able to learn new things with dementia by doing it over and over. Memories of long ago are another thing that's often well maintained. And I see this all the time in people with dementia, saying like, wow, I may not remember what I have for breakfast, but I can remember what I used to eat every day when I was like 6. I remember that oatmeal my grandma used to make me, and even some of those old memories can come out later in life, or as you have dementia that weren't present to you before. So knowing that, you can really put that into practice within a creative arts program, or even in a communication with somebody. Okay, I'm going to try and go faster through these, but also, people with dementia can maintain strengths in using multiple of their senses. And sometimes there can even be that sense like you see in other disabilities where maybe there's a vision impairment, but a person is very attuned with hearing, or vice versa. That can also happen with a person with dementia, where maybe cognition is a bit impacted, but being able to connect through touch is enhanced, or vision or hearing or other things. Being present in the moment, also a strength, which can come through, okay, maybe I can't remember what just happened. Maybe thinking ahead it seems confusing, but being able to be present right here in the moment and focusing on what is happening between us or here in the world right here and now is something that can be very strong for people with dementia. Moving your body also, not to be overlooked. I think many times we like focus so much on our brains and like, oh, I can't think right anymore. It's so frustrating, which is, it is frustrating, but like our wonderful bodies can move around, and being able to do things like walk, move, dance, hold hands, connect. People can also become more attuned or sensitive to the emotions of others. Again, being able to like read faces or connect emotionally when maybe some of that cognitive aspect is not as present. People sometimes discover new ways to communicate. And then finally, using the imagination, which connects a lot with creativity. But I think Mary Jane and I both really admire Ann Basting over in Wisconsin, but she has a book that's called Forget Memory, Try Imagination. And thinking about like, we're so tied to trying to remember this or that as like what almost forms our identity. But if you let loose of trying to hold on to like all these things to remember, you can just really lean in to the imaginative capacity in doing things like storytelling, or just anyways, there's a lot that can happen with imagination and creative arts in people with dementia. And then tapping into that wisdom that's built up throughout life, which that wisdom is still absolutely there in the midst of having dementia. When I first worked at an adult day program here in Seattle called Elderwise, as a student, every day we got together, sat around a table, and we talked. We had spent like an hour of conversation just talking about a deep question, something like, what do you most value? Or I would often use it. I would often use this as a time to ask for advice, but saying like, oh, if you're about to graduate from college, what's the most important thing to be thinking about? And people could give all kinds of very wise advice, even with dementia, being able to consider, well, with my life experience, this is what's important, this is what's valuable, and really having that storehouse built up that can be tapped into if people aren't just written off as like, they can't really think well. So a lot of well-maintained strengths. And sorry, this is not moving very quickly here. Here we go. Okay, so with all of those strengths and capacities, many of them translate into a person having potential with the creative arts. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but just to recognize that the creative arts often incorporate many of those kinds of areas of strength for someone. For example, procedural memory or habit memory. Many of the arts incorporate that how-to aspect of, like I was saying before, knowing what to do when you have a paintbrush in your hand, or For example, I mean, I've seen a really beautiful video, maybe you've seen it too, of an older woman with dementia who had been a ballet dancer, and like hearing music coming on and her body is moving in the ways that it used to move. That's habit memory. That's like, you know, I've done first position 50 billion times in my life, and my body knows what first position is. Emotional memory. Very intact in persons with dementia. Creative arts, in all kinds of ways, tap into emotional memories. And thinking of music, for example, and how like listening to a piece of music from that maybe I heard at my high school prom, and like all the memories that come back with that. The arts are often, this is really cool, but centered in present moment experience. You can experience them in the here and now. Some of them you have to experience in the here and now, like listening to a symphony. It's there in that moment and then it's gone. It's not something that you like are, I mean, you can think back on it, but the literal experience of it is right now. And people with dementia are here in the now, and they can experience arts in that way too. The arts often incorporate those multiple senses. They can incorporate physical movement like dance. Many creative arts are nonverbal, which can be really great for someone with dementia who maybe is having challenge with some of that verbal communication. Maybe it's hard to put your words together, but when you get a big piece of paper and some colors, you can spread them around and express yourself without having to use words. And you can have that feeling of, wow, that barrier that I've experienced with like, getting my words out, it's not even there anymore. Because I'm communicating in a different way through the arts. And the arts also can be used to tap into memories of distant past, storytelling, reminiscing, and then using the imagination. There's a really beautiful, very simple program that Ann Basting in Wisconsin developed called Time Slips, which is really based around looking at an evocative image and as a group creating a story about it, like, hey, what do you see here? What do you think this person's name is? What do you think they're doing? What are they going to do next? And just using your imagination to build a story that can be so enlivening for people and doesn't rely on needing to remember a certain thing or a certain fact or anything like that. So the arts can give people with dementia a portal into a world where the challenges or the symptoms or those like day-to-day struggles of like, having to remember this or that, or having to perform in a certain way aren't even there. And for maybe, 30 minutes or an hour, you're able to be in the moment. You're able to do things that feel accessible. You're able to express yourself. You're able to, not only express yourself, but have a self, like to show I am here. I create. That's a very powerful place to be in, to be a creator. When maybe you've been told like, you can't think that well, like you don't matter anymore. No, I do matter. I even can make a new thing in this world. And I can even name it. I can make a painting and I can name it and I can say, this is mine. Anyway, I think there's so much potential there. And that's why I love the creative arts and creative arts programming for people with dementia and the power that it has. A few examples of that. This program is called Reignite the Mind. It's a improv theater based program at Taproot Theater in Seattle. This was a program that was the idea of somebody with dementia, the guy in the tie-dye shirt on the right here, named Roger, but he had a lot of difficulty getting his words out. And he said at one point in a memory loss group, I have friends that do improv theater. I wonder if there might be something in that for those of us like me that have dementia and have a harder time communicating in the typical way. And we reached out to the founder of the theater across the street from the senior center where he was at. And her mom had Alzheimer's, and she was very up for just giving it a try. And this was probably about 10 years ago. Anyway, she ended up working with Roger and his group to develop this improv based workshop for people with dementia, where again, it's focused on the present moment. You're not remembering lines at all or script. It's literally just working with what's coming up in the moment and saying yes to that and going with it, which is a great skill for anyone. And people with dementia are really well equipped we're being in that present moment and going with the flow. Here's a quote from one of the caregivers that participated in that program. She said, family members with Alzheimer's never lose their imagination. They're still a gift in your life when you're able to do things with them, like improv, that bring out the beauty in their mind. There's been a lot of studies now looking into the impact of creative arts programming for persons with dementia, including a study right there at the Frye Art Museum, which I put on our resource slide. But one of the first studies was at the Museum of Modern Art back in 2008, and they took a look at how engaging in a program called Meet Me at MoMA, where people with early stage dementia were coming into the museum to work with professionally facilitated arts programming, and they wanted to see how did this actually affect people. And some of the results that they found included having fewer emotional problems, elevations in mood, increased sense of social support, and elevated sense of self-esteem, just through doing a weekly museum program, which is, I think a lot. I think it's nice to point out these type of things. You don't necessarily, you can't even necessarily get them from medication, like the medications we have right now. And so it's so powerful to be able to come together and have that creative arts experience and the impact it can have on you. Because of that potential with creative arts and persons with dementia, we're really continuing to work on incorporating creative arts programming here at the Memory Hub, where I work and where Mary Jane is a founding partner. And just some examples of how we've been using the creative arts. Up on the left, you'll see a picture of, we have an art gallery here that showcases the art made by people with dementia, which is kind of a twofold purpose. One, just giving people a chance to celebrate their own work, but also a place to communicate to the community about the creativity of persons with dementia, and that message that people with dementia are still here. There's an adult day program here called Elderwise that focuses a lot on the creative arts. They do an hour of watercolor painting every day and make these beautiful, colorful paintings, which the exhibit right now in the gallery is all art made by people in the Elderwise program. We also do a nature engagement program, which somebody in this group mentioned nature as their creative expression. And I resonate with that as well. And it's happening right now. Actually, we work with the Parks Department and people come together and do nature-based crafts. The picture here, they were doing like a weaving with different types of plant material and flowers to create a wall hanging. And definitely want to highlight the Frye Art Museum as a partner here at the Memory Hub. They bring their monthly Alzheimer Cafe program here, and that includes taking a look at a piece from the gallery. Here you can see an example in this photo, but we pull up on a screen one of the images from the Frye Gallery, and then have a beautiful discussion focusing not on like who painted this, what year was it made, but it's focused on accessible questions like, what do you see? What stands out to you? How do you feel as you look at this? What does it make you think of? So very engaging to persons with dementia. There's also singing as well. So various different ways we're incorporating creative arts, and more to come. All right, so we've talked a little bit about creative potential in all of us. We talked some of the basics of dementia, creativity and dementia, and some examples of creative arts programming. I want to finish up now my last slides, focusing on some of those practical tips for interacting with persons with dementia and communicating with persons with dementia. And there's a lot of little tips on these slides. I hope just at least a few of them may stand out to you as you move forward in your community. So first off, I don't think any of us necessarily need this first reminder: be kind, patient, and respectful. But Roger, that individual that came up with the Taproot Theater idea, whenever we would talk about what is a dementia-friendly community, he would always say, it's about kindness. It's about kindness. So I like to keep that in there, just recognizing that kindness can go a long way, even if we maybe have no idea what the person is saying or why they're doing what they're doing, being able to be kind and bring that kind spirit. With that, being present to the person, bringing that belief that the person is not an empty shell with nothing in there. The person is a person, and that we can connect with in a variety of different ways. So getting on the same level as a person, making eye contact, doing all that you can to bring your whole self and be present person to person. It can help to reduce distractions. It can help to, turn off noise. There's a radio in the background or lots of clutter everywhere. It can help to reduce that so that there's less stimulus happening. If you're working on communication. I don't do this very well, but speaking slowly and clearly is helpful. Posing one question or instruction at a time. So like if you're doing, for example, an arts project, instead of saying, okay, everyone have a seat, pull out your paper. We're going to be working with the red and the yellow paint today. So get that big paintbrush and stick it in there and let's get going. Whoa, that's way too much, way too much. So really breaking it down step by step, one thing at a time. Here we go. Let's all have a seat. All right, let's take out our paper. One thing at a time with time in between each question or instruction. And they say it takes up to 20 seconds for someone with dementia. I mean, this is very general, but potentially up to 20 seconds for someone with dementia to process something that's said or a question and come up with a response. So with that, getting really comfortable, for all of us, getting really comfortable with leaving that extra space instead of feeling like, oh no, it's been quiet for 10 seconds. This is so awkward. Just letting the space be, letting the time be, and giving the person the benefit of the doubt that a response is coming. And I certainly just heard this from an individual in a program last week who was talking about being so frustrated that people would finish his sentences or that his partner would often kind of just like take over in conversations. And he said, I told her, I just need some time. I just need some time. And I think sometimes can be a hard gift to give because we're a very fast moving culture, but just giving somebody that gift of a few extra seconds before diving in and answering for them or before moving on is a very big, significant gift in terms of the person still feeling like respected. Okay. So some more communication tips, using visual aids if possible. I chose that picture of the person pointing to the computer screen and using gestures. I do this all the time. I think anytime where you can not just say, okay, pick up the blue cup and we'll put your coffee in it. Like just saying it like that is something, but the person is having to process. Pick up, what does that mean? Blue, what is that color? Cup, which thing is that? Like there's a lot of processing that's required, which can be you can eliminate the extra challenge if you're just pointing at the thing you're talking about as you're saying it. Let's pick up that blue cup. Your hand is directing their attention toward what you're talking about. They don't even have to think about what is that blue, what does blue mean again? It's just, oh, she's pointing, I'm going to take this thing. They're maybe only processing the thought of pick up. So using visual aids, pointing, even, if you're talking with somebody about things that have happened or other people, like past life experiences, having a photograph of it is so helpful versus being able to say like, well, what do you remember about Aunt Betty? Aunt Betty, oh my gosh, who is Aunt Betty? If you have a photo of Aunt Betty, what do you remember about her? Way easier for somebody to engage in that conversation. Sometimes making a decision can be challenging, especially if there's lots of options. So I think oftentimes narrowing it down to a couple choices can be useful. Would you like coffee or would you like tea? Instead of, what do you want to drink today? So just narrowing down, providing options. But again, providing those options and that person still has that chance to make a choice, but maybe narrowing the choices. Being relaxed and calm. recognizing that many times people are very attuned to emotions. They can get a sense of this person seems annoyed, this person seems impatient, this person seems angry. Am I doing something wrong? And then their anxiety is going up. When you're anxious, you're not thinking as well. It can just be like a downward spiral. So yourself bringing that relaxed and calm feeling can really help another person also feel like, whew, okay, I don't have to be nervous. I don't have to perform around this person. I can just also be calm and do my best, and it's going to be okay. So a few more. Greeting the person warmly by name. Depending on the person and your relationship with them and kind of how their dementia is affecting them, I find that at times it can be helpful to the next one too, providing your own name and relationship where that's appropriate. So, saying, hello, hey Jane, so good to see you. It's Mary Grace, your neighbor, or it's Mary Grace, your daughter, whatever it is, just adding that extra thing in there, that extra identifier, even though to yourself, it might seem like that's really awkward, or are they going to be offended that I'm like identifying who I am? But if you say it in a very natural way, not in a like, obviously you don't know who I am, so I'm going to just tell you. If you just say it in a normal, nonchalant way, hey, it's your neighbor Mary, good to see you. It can, depending on the person and their stage of dementia, but it can help, again, take away that anxiety that a person may experience of looking at you and thinking they look familiar. I'm supposed to know who I am. Or I'm supposed to know who they are. This is so embarrassing. I can't remember their name. I also am not quite sure who they are. And I'm really stressed out, and now I can't think of anything. You're like eliminating all of that for the person by just identifying yourself in a really natural way. Also, name tags are really helpful for that same reason. Any program, definitely name tags. Find other ways to communicate using smiles, physical touch. A little, touch on the shoulder can mean a lot when you're at a loss for words and how to relate to each other. Don't argue. I like one caregiver said, is your role to correct or to connect? Do you prefer to connect? Do you prefer to correct or to connect? And I think ultimately, for most things, our goal can just be to connect. It's not oftentimes a life or death issue. If you say today, let's go ahead and work with that red paint, and somebody starts dipping their paintbrush in the yellow, and you're like, no, I said red. What are you doing? No, we don't need to do that. I mean, most things are not life or death. And so just finding those ways to connect rather than making sure they're doing everything right or they're remembering everything correctly. They say something like, oh, Aunt Betty visited me this morning, and they didn't visit this morning, they came yesterday. There's really no need to say, well, no, actually they came yesterday. It's not life or death. It doesn't matter. And there's no need to like start a big argument about it. Just letting it go. Oh, really? What did you and Aunt Betty do? See what comes up. Okay. Last slide on communication tips. So assuming that a person has a reason for what they're doing or what they're saying. And this, I think you can be a little bit, you can think of yourself like a detective and be like, well, I wonder what it is about them, or I wonder what it is about their background, where they're responding this way, or they're saying this word that I can't quite understand, but putting together all that I know about this person and all that they've said in the past, I wonder if I can figure it out. So it can be kind of fun thinking about like putting together clues that you know about somebody and considering there's a reason that they're doing this. There's a reason they're saying this, and having that assumption rather than thinking everything they do that doesn't make sense to you. Well, they're just weird, or there's no reason for that. Actually, most of the time there is a reason for somebody to be doing something. And it can be interesting to just consider that. Validating the person's feelings and experiences. When you're in conversation, it can be helpful to focus on more open-ended questions rather than questions that have just one right answer. For example, maybe I'm in a conversation with people with dementia, and instead of saying, all right, let's go around the room and everybody tell me what college did you graduate from? For some people, that might be really easy. the word might be on the tip of their tongue. For some people, that's going to be super hard. That's like feeling you're on the spot, you're being quizzed, you have to remember, oh, what's the name of that place? Names and like specific names of things can be really hard for folks with dementia. So maybe instead of asking that, asking what's one thing you really enjoyed, if you want, if in your college or in your high school experience, what's something you enjoyed. So open-ended, there's no right or wrong answer, and something that people can, an accessible question that doesn't put someone on the spot. Last one on here, if you can't understand what someone says, one thing to do is just try repeating back what you heard, even if it doesn't make sense to you. And this what it does is it gives a person a sense of being heard and kind of maintains that connection. Even if there's not content that's coming across, you're still connecting. So if somebody just says flibbity jibbity boop boop or something like that, like literally just being like, oh, flibbity jibbity, which might seem like crazy to you or me, might seem like, why in the world would I do that? But just saying it back in like a calm, like, oh, I've heard you kind of way, can help the other person feel like, okay, I'm seen, I'm heard, and that being the purpose of just connecting. All right, so I'm wrapping up now, hoping that we took away some of these key messages, that the creative arts can be a source of connection, meaning enjoyment for all of us, as we grow older, and even especially for persons with dementia. That those different aspects of communication with extra patience, respectness, and kindness can go a long way in helping a person with dementia feel welcome. It can help keeping language simple, giving extra time to process, demonstrating things, pointing to things, staying calm, etc. And by using these practices, we can help people with dementia and care partners stay engaged within our community, including in creative arts settings. A few resources that I'm happy to share these slides if you all would like at any point. And I'm going to now open it up. We have a few minutes for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any questions before we let her go?
What if you have someone that just wants to communicate shortly and then like be done? And I mean, they just act like there's something else. You feel like they're about to do something else. And they're shorter than they normally would be again.
I want to make sure I heard it totally. Do you mind repeating the question?
Repeat it back.
I know what I heard you saying. I think what was it? What if somebody is saying shorter things than they normally say?
No, like if you're in a conversation or you want to try and have a conversation and they act like it's over and they want to move on to something else.
Okay, you're wanting to connect and they're acting like it's over. I'm done here.
Right. You got it.
Yeah, I think it's fine to honor if somebody feels like they're done and over. I think it's fine to be done. I think it's fine to connect in very short episodes, I guess, if that seems to be working best. I think that you can be like it if you're going to see that person regularly over time. You can also be kind of like a detective in that, in like testing and seeing like, oh, what happens if I bring in, for example, like, oh, maybe I bring in something to look at together. I bring in an old photo album and we're looking at this. Do they seem to be more engaged? Or what happens if I bring in a song from an era that I know they really love and we're listening to that together? Do they seem like more engaged, or they want to spend more time or not? And kind of testing and seeing, or maybe if we're walking together, it seems like they're up for having a little bit more time with me versus just sitting in an enclosed space. Or maybe if we're in, looking out at nature together versus like sitting here just drinking our coffee. I think it can be helpful. So one, it's okay to honor if a person just is done, but also maybe like over time, if you have multiple times with them, trying out different things that might be engaging and seeing like, oh, how did that work? Did they seem like they were up for a few more minutes together when I was listening to music, or when we were looking at nature, looking at photos, or whatever it might be, and just trying it out.
You might look at the previous professions, anything they have done in the past
If they were a carpenter, maybe did a small task with an activity, or if they were in the medical field, they draw the task, which is they could probably pull something out of. And task-oriented projects that are very simple, break down the tasks also.
The connected work is kind of right.
Yeah.
Because it's like usually for me, it's. My mom, it's something she's talked to somebody else. And it's very important what she's talked to them about. So she's not really present in the communication that I've got. But she wants to go back to that. And so that's kind of the situation I run into sometimes, like, I can tell. It says that they have ESP, I always feel like, oh, she's like, oh, let's move on. There's another,
It's also, you look at your relationship with, she may
Yeah.
think you have somebody that is, very, very young and doesn't quite understand, or, doesn't want to share her inability to do something with you, when it may show up. So she's a little uncomfortable with showing her weak side or her not her strength. So looking at that as well. Your relationship with her and where I left off, and really trying to figure out, a new relationship.
a present thing is interesting, because I try and do that whenever I talk to people, because I have that mind that does tend to wander into another topic. And that's what I'm curious how you bring somebody into the present at the time when you're talking. Because I know when I'm out of the present, sometimes people can tell. They say, are you in there?
Question over here too.
Yeah, I was just wondering, there were a lot of good points there and I couldn't write them down, but I didn't see any of that in this information.
Mary Grace, you're gonna give us access to these slides so we can
Sure.
share them. Yeah.
Yeah, and recording,
Yes.
the recording will be on.
Oh,
Med Health. Yeah.
no.
You'll be able to watch it again. I have a really basic question, which is, we're so used to coming into a room and saying, hi, how are you today? Is that an open-ended question that is useful, or should we rephrase it in a different way?
To me, that works very well. It's focused on emotion and the present moment. That's pretty accessible.
Okay.
Yeah. How are you doing? How are you feeling today? Yeah. Any of that. I like to keep, for me, I have a very colloquial, low-key style. So yeah, I might say how are you doing? How are you feeling? Like that. But yeah, it's present moment. It's emotion based. There's no right or wrong answer. That's great.
Just a quick question. I interact with several people who have dementia, different levels of dementia. And what I find difficult is the aphasias, not being able to find the words.
Yeah.
And so in trying to interact, when the person's trying to respond and they're struggling so hard and the word's not coming and it won't come. So in trying to communicate, just when you're not doing an activity, like, how's your day, right? That's a hard thing for me. I'm sure it's hard for them as well. And so what are some kind of tips? Do you have any tips to make that a little bit easier or more positive or less stressful for the person?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely hard. I think the whole thing of yourself, I can imagine you being a very patient person with those individuals, but I think bringing your own calm and patience versus the this is so annoying vibe, get the word out vibe, I think is a good foundation. I do think I heard you say when we're not doing an activity, it's harder, but I do think that actually many times, even if you're not quote unquote doing an activity, having something that you can do together versus just sitting and talking is helpful in terms of building the relationship. So even if it's, sitting and listening to music, looking at something together, pointing at it, enjoying it, physical touch, walking, anything where you're kind of enjoying something in the environment together that doesn't require words, which the arts are really good at that, can be helpful. And then I think if the person, maybe even before they had a very progressed aphasia, but maybe they communicate, if they appreciate you filling in words or not, anyway, you could consider that. But some people really don't like it and get more frustrated if you kind of make a guess. But if the person seems open to that kind of a communication where maybe you give them space, they're struggling, the word is not coming over time, you can tell they're getting more and more frustrated. You can offer of like, oh, are you talking about this? Is that right? That's the way I usually do it. Something like, oh, you're meaning this. I usually pose it as a question of like, oh, are you talking about the cat you used to have? And the person can then say yes or no. Anyway, so if it seems that they're open to that of like offering, is this the word or is this what you're meaning? And letting them then say yes or no, that can be a way to communicate too.
Great, thank you.
All right.
So I wanted to thank Mary Grace. She, to be mindful of her time, she actually has a really exciting program that she is facilitating in a couple minutes. It's the, remind me the name of the program.
Garden Discovery Program. Yeah, it's that nature-based program. So yeah, I do need to head out, but I'm happy to, if there are other questions you want to send me, I'm happy to respond to those by email if you want, Mary Jane.
Great.
Thank you so much for
Thank
your time.